It was the vacation we'd been planning for months. The perfect break from our usual routine. We'd rented a sprawling house nestled at the edge of a dense forest, surrounded by a vast lawn where the kids could run and play as much as they wanted. The place had a rustic charm, aged but cozy, with high ceilings and windows that welcomed in the natural light. Out back, there was an old wooden swing hanging from a sturdy branch. A brick barbecue pit stood near the treeline, where I'd imagined we'd cook together under the stars. My two kids, Anna and Ben, were running around, tumbling in the grass, their laughter echoing against the stillness of the trees. I'd poured myself a cup of coffee, enjoying the view of my kids' joy mixed with the quiet solitude of the place. My brother, Tom, had joined us for the trip. He'd wandered off into the woods to gather firewood for the barbecue. He wasn't gone long, but as he approached, I could see something off in his expression. His face was pale, his hand still clutching a small bundle of dry branches, but he looked unsettled. "Hey," he called out, voice low, glancing back toward the treeline. "Can you come with me for a minute? Just follow me." I laughed, assuming it was some prank. Tom had always been the joker in the family, always finding ways to mess with me. But the look in his eyes was anything but humorous. "What's wrong?" I asked, glancing back at my kids. His face tightened. "Just come. I'll explain." I hesitated, looking back at Anna and Ben. Something deep inside told me not to leave them alone, an instinct I couldn't shake. "Kids, come on," I called to them. "Let's go see what Uncle Tom wants to show us." That instinct was right, but I wish I hadn't listened to it. As we made our way into the woods, Tom moved quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if he was afraid of being followed. The sun was setting, casting a muted orange glow that made the shadows grow long and dense among the trees. The air felt different here, damp and heavy, the scent of moss and earth replacing the crispness of the lawn. My children, usually rambunctious, seemed to sense the change too. They stayed close, quiet, and curious. "What is it?" I finally asked, keeping my voice low. Tom stopped suddenly, holding his arm out to halt us. Just ahead, through the trees, I could see the massive shape of an animal sprawled across the ground. It took me a second to register what I was looking at. An enormous bear, lying motionless, its fur matted and darkened with grime. My breath caught in my throat. "Tom, the brochure didn't say anything about bears out here." He shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on the bear's still form. "Look closer." The animal lay twisted at an unnatural angle. Its limbs splayed out as if it had been flung there. Its coat was dull, covered in dirt, and its belly bulged grotesquely, swollen and distended. There was no obvious sign of a struggle, no torn earth or broken branches. Just this bear, lying impossibly still, its mouth slightly open in a final silent growl. "What happened to it?" I muttered, fighting back a wave of nausea. The entire scene was wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. Could it be poachers? Or maybe it was hit by something? Tom shook his head, crouching down for a closer look. "No bullet wounds and no injuries I can see. Besides, poachers would have taken the fur or something. This looks like something just attacked it, but there's no blood," I pointed out, a chill settling over me. "No signs of a fight. What kind of predator can do that?" Tom stayed silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the ground, the trees, as if searching for an explanation. But I could tell he was just as unsettled as I was. The forest around us was heavy with an eerie quiet. Even the birds had gone silent. It felt like we were standing in a vacuum, surrounded by nothing but the thickening darkness. I tugged the kids close, my hand unconsciously stroking Anna's hair as if to comfort myself as much as her. "This place, it's dangerous. We shouldn't have come out here," But Tom just kept staring, his gaze lingering on the bear's distended stomach. It's like, whatever did this, it left it here, almost as if it was meant to be found. I shivered, feeling a creeping sense of dread settle into my bones. The forest seemed darker, more oppressive, as if something was watching us from just beyond the trees. "Let's go," I said more firmly this time, taking Anna and Ben's hands. They looked up at me, wide-eyed and worried, sensing the fear I was trying so hard to keep hidden. Tom nodded slowly, glancing back one last time at the bear before we started retracing our steps. We walked quickly, and I kept my eyes fixed on the path ahead. The kids walked close, unusually quiet, their small hands clinging to mine, as if they too sensed that something was very, very wrong. And then, just as the edge of the forest came into view, I heard it, a faint rustling, like something moving through the underbrush. Tom turned to look behind us, his face a mask of dread. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, and for a long, heart-stopping moment, all was silent again. But then, from the shadows, I saw it, a flash of something pale and thin, moving low to the ground. It was quick, too quick for me to make out any detail, but I felt its gaze, cold and calculating, piercing through the darkness. The creature stopped, standing unervingly still far off in the shadows, facing away from us. My heart hammered as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was tall and unnaturally thin. Its pale skin stretched tightly over sharp angles, making it look skeletal and strange, almost insect-like. The thing's head tilted back and forth, jerking slightly as if it were sniffing the air or listening for something. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't notice us. Just then, I spotted movement in the distance, between the trees. Another person, a man, was walking deeper into the forest, completely unaware of the creature lurking nearby. He looked like he might have been a hiker, perhaps another vacationer out for an evening walk, with a small flashlight dangling from his hand, casting weak light across the ground. I felt a jolt of panic seize me, and without thinking, I reached down and covered Anna and Ben's eyes with my hands. They squirmed, confused and anxious, but I didn't want them to see what was about to happen. I couldn't even look away myself. I was frozen, forced to witness the horror unfolding before us. The creature moved then, shifting its weight and sinking lower to the ground like a predator preparing to pounce. In one chilling moment, it launched itself forward, a blur of pale limbs and inhuman agility, covering the distance to the man in seconds. The man didn't even have time to react. There was a flash of terror in his eyes as he turned, but then the creature was on him, its long, twisted arms wrapping around him like a spider capturing prey. The man screamed, a blood-curdling cry that cut through the stillness of the forest. I flinched, tightening my grip on the kids. "Dad, what's happening?" Anna whispered, her voice small and afraid. "Shoo," I murmured, my voice thick with dread. "Just stay quiet, okay? We're going to leave." Very, very quietly, my brother, Tom, nodded in silent agreement. His face was as pale as I'd ever seen it, his eyes wide with terror. He looked over his shoulder toward the creature, whose low, guttural hissing had now mixed with the man's desperate pleas. I could see Tom's hands trembling as he motioned for us to move. We took slow, careful steps backward, each of us moving like we were balancing on a wire. I kept my hands on Anna and Ben's shoulders, feeling their quick, panicked breaths under my palms. They kept glancing back, wanting to see what was happening, but I gently turned their heads forward, away from the horror behind us. I could hear the man's voice rise and fall, his cries sharp and raw, filled with desperation and disbelief. He called out for help, his voice breaking into hoarse sobs, and then a laugh. The creature's laugh, a low, chilling sound that reverberated through the trees, dark and unnatural, as if it were reveling in the terror it had caused. Anna whimpered, and I felt her small hand reach for mine, squeezing it so tightly it hurt. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep moving forward. If we ran, it would hear us. If we made too much noise, it would know we were here. The urge to bolt, to grab my children and sprint back to the house, was almost overwhelming, but I knew better. One wrong move and it would turn its attention on us. Tom led the way, stepping carefully, keeping his eyes trained on the path ahead, his every movement measured. My heart pounded as we slipped further, the sounds of the struggle growing fainter, swallowed up by the dense canopy above. With each step, I felt the tension building, as if the creature might sense our presence at any moment and turn its cold, calculating gaze on us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the house came into view through the thinning trees. The warm light from its windows was a stark contrast to the growing darkness around us. A single, fragile sanctuary. We were so close. I dared to breathe again, feeling a small surge of hope. But just then, a loud crack sounded behind us, a branch snapping underfoot. My heart stopped, and I could see Tom stiffen, his face twisting with terror as he slowly turned his head. I couldn't bear to look back, but I could feel it, a new, dark presence in the forest around us. The silence was so absolute that it felt heavy, pressing against us, and I knew without a doubt that the creature had noticed us, that it was aware of our every movement. My mind raced, every survival instinct screaming, knowing that we had only seconds to reach safety. "Move now," Tom hissed, abandoning all pretense of silence. We broke into a run, my children's hands slipping from mine as they bolted toward the house with Tom and me close behind. The forest seemed to close in around us, every shadow feeling like it was moving, stretching, reaching. The house loomed closer and closer, and just as we reached the porch, I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo through the trees, coming from somewhere too close. I threw open the door, practically shoving the kids inside. Tom was right behind us, slamming the door shut and locking it, his eyes darting to the windows, searching for any sign of movement outside. For several moments, we were silent, listening, straining our ears for any sound from outside. The forest had fallen back into its unnatural stillness, and it was that quiet that terrified me most of all. "What was it, Dad?" Ben's voice was barely a whisper, his face pale and tear-streaked. "I don't know, Ben, but it's not something we're ever going to forget." And as I stared out at the silent forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching, waiting. The owners of the cottage, a quiet older couple named Marla and Henry, lived on the first floor in a small suite near the kitchen. When we'd arrived, they'd seemed like kind people, respectful of our privacy and quick to offer directions to nearby trails and points of interest. But now, as I made my way downstairs, each step felt heavier, the darkness of the night pressing down on me, filling me with a strange mixture of dread and anger. Tom had taken the kids to one of the upstairs rooms, trying to calm them down and distract them with a game. But their little faces had been pale and tear-streaked, their voices quiet with fear. The feeling that I'd somehow let them down weighed on me, twisting my stomach as I made my way to Marla and Henry's door. I knocked, my knuckles rapping against the wood more forcefully than I'd intended. After a few moments, Henry opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in the look on my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, frowning. "Is everything all right?" I shook my head, stepping into the room as Marla appeared behind him, looking at me curiously. I took a breath, trying to gather my thoughts, but the words spilled out in a rush. "There's something something dangerous in those woods. We saw a bear mauled. Not only that, but some kind of creature attacked a man right in front of us. It's prowling the forest, and we barely got back here safely. They stared at me, their eyes widening as I spoke. I could see a flicker of doubt cross their faces, and I felt a surge of frustration. Look, I know how this sounds, but it's not safe out there. Your brochure didn't say anything about bears or monsters. Marla's mouth opened and closed, her gaze darting from me to her husband, searching for something to say. Henry folded his arms, looking at me with a faintly skeptical expression. Sir, he began slowly, we've lived here for years. There are no dangerous animals around here that would... But then, as if on cue, a sound drifted in from outside. A low, twisted laugh, echoing from the edge of the forest. It was the same laugh we'd heard out there, that horrible, inhuman chuckle that froze the blood in my veins. Marla clapped a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, while Henry's face went pale, his skepticism vanishing in an instant. What was that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "That's what I've been trying to tell you," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "There's something out there, something that isn't a bear or a person. We need to do something. I'm not sure how to get out of here safely, and I don't want to put my family in danger by staying here. But I also can't just walk out into those woods with that thing out there." Henry swallowed hard, his face drawn and pale. He looked to Marla, who nodded, as if reading his thoughts. "We'll help," he said finally. "We'll lock everything down. But you're right, we can't just leave. It's too dangerous to go out there now." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and helplessness settle over me. The forest seemed to press against the walls, the sounds of night unusually quiet, as if holding its breath. We moved quickly, gathering what we could to reinforce the entrances. Henry and I stacked heavy furniture, chairs, tables, anything that would fit, in front of the doors. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Marla held a flashlight, her hands shaking as she directed the beam toward us. "We haven't had anything like this happen in all our years here," she murmured, her voice strained. "It's always been so peaceful. Do you know anything?" I asked, my voice low as I adjusted a cabinet to block the front door more securely. "Anything at all about something like this?" She shook her head, but I noticed a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also uncertainty, like she was holding something back. "We've heard stories over the years," she said slowly, glancing toward Henry, as if for reassurance. "Just rumors, things people say, about shadows in the woods, strange animals." Henry's face was grim as he helped brace the door. "We always assumed those were just old legends, or something from people's imagination. No one's ever come across something like this before." The sound of footsteps interrupted us. Tom, standing at the top of the stairs, holding Anna and Ben close. They were clinging to him, their small faces still fearful, their eyes darting around as if expecting the creature to burst through the walls at any moment. "It's okay, kids," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just making sure everyone's safe. All right?" They nodded, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They were too young to fully understand, but they could sense the fear, the tension that hung thick in the air. I forced a smile, though it felt hollow, a weak attempt to calm them as I finished adjusting the barricade. Barricading the doors was one thing, but the windows on the first floor were a different challenge entirely. Most of them were large, with flimsy locks, and we didn't have enough furniture to cover them all. Every glance toward the glass felt like looking out into a waiting abyss. I couldn't shake the feeling that, at any moment, I'd see those hollow black eyes staring in at us, just beyond the pain. "Marla, Henry, do you have anything else we can use? Would nails? Anything?" Henry shook his head, his brow furrowed. We have some tools, but not enough wood. The windows have held up through storms. But he trailed off, his gaze fixed nervously on the largest window by the back porch. Tom stepped forward, his face set in determination. We'll cover what we can. The rest we'll keep an eye on. As long as we're careful, maybe it won't notice us. The idea of simply hoping the creature wouldn't notice us didn't sit well with me. But I couldn't think of anything better. We had to make do with what we had. We used heavy blankets and towels, draping them over the windows in an attempt to block out any light. It wasn't much, but it made the interior feel slightly more secure, as if we could hide in the shadows instead of broadcasting our presence. Henry found some thick old curtains in a storage closet, and we draped those over the more exposed windows, hoping that, from the outside, it would appear as though the house was dark and abandoned. Marla moved about quietly, her face drawn, her lips pursed in silent prayer. I caught her glancing out toward the forest, a haunted look in her eyes, as if she too could feel that thing's gaze watching us from somewhere unseen. Finally, as we finished covering the last of the windows, I glanced around the dim room. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling, each sound making us flinch. The children had curled up on the couch, huddled close to each other, and Marla sat near them, offering comfort in the form of whispered assurances. Tom stood by one of the windows, his gaze scanning the dark expanse outside. "Now we wait," Henry muttered, as if trying to reassure himself. But I could see the doubt in his eyes, the gnawing fear that lingered beneath his calm exterior. He looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. "If that thing out there is as smart as you say, it might know exactly where we are." I nodded, feeling a chill settle into my bones. The night stretched before us, long and dark, each minute feeling like an eternity. The only thing left to do was wait, and hope that whatever lurked out there wouldn't come knocking on our door. I had no idea how much time had passed when, at last, the first faint rays of dawn seeped through the cracks around the window coverings. The dim, gray light was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It felt like a lifeline, like we had finally surfaced from some terrible nightmare. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest loosen as the world outside began to brighten. Whatever that thing was, it had left us alone through the night. Maybe it was smart enough to understand that we were more of a challenge here in the house than out in the open. As I finished strapping the kids into the back seat of the car, I glanced at Marla, who stood by the porch steps, looking out over the lawn with a hollow expression. I wanted to say something, to offer some words of comfort, but nothing seemed appropriate. What could I possibly say?